All right. Hi, all, and happy Water Day. My name is Sarah Minnis, and I'm a PhD candidate at Memorial University of Newfoundland. And my research is actually in water, and I've worked on other research projects specifically about rural water infrastructure. So I'm really happy to be here today and being your host for this important water topic. We're here today with three amazing speakers. We have first Sarah-Patricia Breen from the University of Saskatchewan, who will introduce rural water infrastructure challenges and will speak generally to the challenges found across the country and highlight opportunities related to asset management, staff training, and collaborative action. The next speaker is Gerry Lahey, and he is from Municipal Affairs and Environment at the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. And he will discuss ways in which the province of Newfoundland and Labrador address rural infrastructure challenges and some opportunities that they have there. And last, Paul Kraehling from the University of Guelph will discuss the importance of green infrastructure and related to water in rural communities. We will have 5 minutes after each speaker for questions. As Michael mentioned, put your questions in the Q&A box and we'll make sure they get answered. And then at the end, we're going to have questions for everyone on the panel. So we'll start first with Sarah Breen. Sarah-Patricia Breen has her PhD in Resource and Environmental Management from Simon Fraser University. Her dissertation focused on alternative approaches to drinking water management in rural communities. Sarah is currently a postdoc at the University of Saskatchewan, working on a project entitled Diagnosing Policy and Governance Effectiveness for Agricultural Water Management During Times of Change. Take it away, Sarah.
All right, thanks for joining us today. And as Sarah said, kind of happy World Water Day. And so I'm going to talk about a couple of examples of innovative solutions for sustainable drinking water, rural drinking water systems today. And the case studies that I'm presenting come from a book chapter that I wrote with Sarah and with our colleague Kelly Vaughton. And it's part of a forthcoming book called Integrative Services and Service Infrastructure for the 21st Century, or for 21st Century Rural Sustainability. And we are in the middle of having a bit of a storm where I live right now, which always impacts my internet connectivity. So I apologize in advance for any technical glitches on this end. So just to get started, this is basically the academic outline of what I'll be talking about today. So a bit about what the problem is, the context of the two case studies that I'm going to be talking about, then the details of the asset management case study, as well as the capacity building, the training case study, and then lessons learned from other places. Okay, so what's the problem? Infrastructure basically provides the foundation of our society: roads, lights, internet, wastewater, drinking water. It links directly to our quality of life. It impacts the environment both positively and negatively, and it influences the economy, again, both positively and negatively. Generally, built infrastructure, so any type of infrastructure, has really been suffering from a lack of investment over the past number of decades. And it's leading to what people have been calling an infrastructure deficit, so a gap between what's needed and what's available to meet current needs. And particularly in rural places, this infrastructure deficit gets exacerbated by all these other contextual changes and factors, demographic changes, capacity limitations, that type of thing. So the photo that I have up here, I picked this one because it's an interesting one. It's worth noting that this tower did not just fall down. It fell down because it's designed to fall down under extreme weather events that way. But it shows a really interesting example where with the changing climate and climate change, we're going to see more examples of this. So that's one of those additional factors that really influence what we're talking about when we're talking about infrastructure. So moving on to water specifically. Water is a basic human right. It's a fundamental component of environmental sustainability. It's a huge part of human development. And so managing water from source to tap for drinking water is a key facet when it comes to sustainable development. That sustainable management of drinking water infrastructure plays a vital role in delivering safe and clean drinking water to residents, And in rural places, we see that there's significant challenges to drinking water service delivery in both public systems and private systems. And that flows, pardon the pun, from the complex factors that I mentioned earlier. So demographics, capacity, physical geography, all those types of, all those many factors, I should say. And this basically creates a situation where drinking water management has become a serious challenge in rural places. It's one that we're struggling to address. And so we want to look at innovative ways to address these problems. So it would be possible for me to cover all elements of this challenge in one day. So two key aspects of it are asset management. So kind of having an accurate inventory of all the infrastructure that's there, what state it's in, what it needs. And then the human resources side. So who's working on these systems? How do they need to be trained? That type of thing. And those are the two things that I'm going to talk about today. So just a bit of background and context about where we're talking geographically. Rural Canada, no surprise to many folks on this call, it's characterized by small populations, low population density, increasingly more of an aging population. We have large distances, physical barriers like mountains or water, and oftentimes this can result in capacity challenges, both human, so getting the people, getting the right trained people, as well as financial challenges. What this also results in is that we often have a small or a high number of small systems. So where I live in the Kootenays, which is where the picture is taken, we have over 2,000 recorded, so that's known water systems for about 160,000 people. So that's because of the geographic barriers we have between communities, because you get these very small systems with a very small number of people on it. And often this can be where there's small numbers of staff or systems that have no staff and have volunteers. And so Sarah, Kelly, and I looked at case studies in two places. One is 6 communities across the Kootenays, which is what that photo is up there. And then also the coastal community of Centerville, Wareham, Trinity in the Kittiwake region of Newfoundland and Labrador. And despite being on opposite ends of the country, these case study regions do have a great deal in common, which is very interesting. All right, so when it comes to asset management, what we were studying for the book chapter and what I want to talk about is new technology. Basically, good asset management is one way to improve the lifespan of your infrastructure. And so places like Case Study Community in Newfoundland identified issues with asset management as a major problem. So, you know, if the best practice is knowing where your infrastructure actually is in the ground and the conditions and having digital maps and regular maintenance, and those are what the ideal would be. That's not necessarily what occurs on the ground. You get a lot of limited maps, paper maps that people have scribbled on, and so the end result is that you don't actually know what's in the ground. Nobody's really quite sure how long it's been there for, what needs to happen to it. And then the result of this, not just in our case study community, but across the board, is that you end up with situations where you're waiting for failure as opposed to doing preventative maintenance. And this is a really unfortunate reality for most rural and remote communities, not only in Newfoundland, but across the country. So the case study community, pardon me, lost my place in my notes. The end result is like what is exemplified by the quote here on the screen. Situations where town staff are interested in getting a better handle on what's going on. So electronic programs like TownSuite municipal software are examples that can help with this asset management challenge. So it can help you inventory your infrastructure, assess the condition of it, assess appropriate water rates, help with financial planning. And it basically just helps smaller communities to do asset management. And so this software program was brought in for testing, basically in Centerville, Wareham, and Trinity, and used over sorry, I can't remember the exact dates that it was piloted for, but at any rate, since the full implementation, council, town staff, water operators have been able to digitize their maps, for example, and then there have been a great deal of benefits associated with that. So they have these interactive maps where they're able to easily retrieve, for example, curb stop locations or other as-built drawings, so that they know in real time in a digital format where everything is, and if there's a problem, where the exact problem is, and you're able to send maps from one device to another, so there's no more flipping through all these paper maps and trying to find the one that went missing 20 or 30 years ago. Pardon me. So they're able to better visualize their water infrastructure in the ground, and through the use of this software have improved asset management greatly. For the questions section, I will also mention that Sarah Minnis did the majority of that research, so the more detailed questions we can aim at her. Moving on to the human capacity building section, which is what I focused on. So this is the case study in the Kootenays, looking at training and capacity building. And so basically water operators are the people who operate and maintain drinking water and wastewater systems. They ensure the delivery of the service. Certified operators have to meet certain levels of standards and testing. Now, not every province requires certification, but if you're in a province like British Columbia where you do, you have to do ongoing and continuing education like any professional body in order to maintain your certification. So there's benefits, recognized benefits to having certified water operators, a higher level of expertise, for example, standardized practices. But despite those benefits, particularly for rural places, it creates a great deal of challenges because certification comes with costs to the operators. You know, they have to pay for continuing education. There's the annual association dues. It comes with costs to employers in the form of higher wages. If you're a skilled professional, you are going to be making a higher wage. Also, the cost of the courses, travel, accommodation, and replacing that operator while they're gone. That might not be a big thing in a city, but in a community where you maybe have one or two operators, if one or both of them are gone, your community's on boil water advisory. And for our area in British Columbia, we don't have any training centers here, which means everyone has to go out of the region at great cost to the municipalities. And then you have additional issues, like it has been observed that a lot of the training courses were for systems like, say, the system that they have in Kelowna or Vancouver, which is a very complex, computerized, very large system, not really the context that we're working with here. You also have issues of attracting skilled people to rural places where a lack of spousal employment is a big deal. A lot of the traditional training methods have been in class as opposed to hands-on, which doesn't always work for these folks. And so with all of those observations, some very enterprising and very creative folks in the Kootenays from several different communities in collaboration with the Columbia Basin Trust Water Smart program got together and developed this idea of peer-to-peer training. And the whole principle behind this was they were going to, with the certification board, make it so that if I have an expertise in a very specific area, I can sign up to be a trainer, not for a full course, but for a very small half-hour to 3-hour session so that I can, you know, work with Sarah Minnis and teach her that particular skill over an afternoon. And we both get our continuing education credits for that. We don't have to leave town. There's no closures of the system. Obviously, it's cost effective, and you're working hands-on on your specific system. Now, it's not meant to be a replacement for those traditional training events, particularly ones where you have to leave town, and the bigger ones, you know, that you need the certifications for. But it does take a lot of the financial burden away from those communities so that they can support those larger events. And so we did an evaluation of this peer-to-peer pilot, and there was a number of benefits that came out of this. Hands-on training by everyone that I talked to was vastly preferred to classroom training. It was felt that they really got a grip on the skills that they were learning. It also just overall, from a managerial perspective, resulted in skills improvements outside of the direct skills that they were teaching. So communication, planning, mentorship, those were staff confidence. That was another one where they saw great improvements in. And so again, it wasn't a replacement for traditional training, but a complement that allowed for human capacity building at a local scale within that context. And then there was talk of sharing from one community to another community, so you're getting that regional collaboration as well. Obviously, there were challenges. The chief among those was the need for internal and external support. So this particular pilot had the support from the Columbia Basin Trust Water Smart program. And those staff provided not necessarily a push, but they were a body that the folks participating were accountable to. And while that was very successful while it was running, the Columbia Basin Trust subsequently shuttered the Water Smart program and really put a dent in what the functionality of the peer-to-peer program as a result of that. So lessons learned, what does this mean for other places? Basically, whether we're talking about asset management or human training or anything else, in order to improve rural drinking water systems, what we really need are those place-based solutions. Something that really takes into account context, the people, their capacity, all of those things. The first case study really demonstrated potential and opportunity for technology to assist in asset management, whereas the second one focused on contextually appropriate approaches to building human capacity, helping retain and continue to train skilled professionals. In terms of what these things had in common, very quickly, because I am running out of time, they're both very innovative, one in terms of the product used, the other one in terms of the process. They were both, as I mentioned, place-based, so the ideas and their application were tailored to the local capacity, the local context, and designed in such a way to be scalable and flexible to address local needs. There was advantages, or both took advantage of collaborative opportunities, so taking a larger multi-community or regional approach. And those elements, the innovation, place-based, and collaboration, were the three key elements that Sarah Kelly and I noted as kind of critical components to success, if you will. And then with that in mind, not to end as a Debbie Downer, but sometimes I am, there are those challenges that remain in terms of ongoing financial capacity. The support from third-party organizations, particularly with something like the peer-to-peer program, those need time and effort to get established. It's not something that you can run a 6-month pilot project and expect it to take off, and finding those long-term supports from third parties and financial organizations can be challenging. And I will leave it there just so as to not cut into everybody else's time. Thank you very much. And for those who are interested in reading more, look for the book when it comes out. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Sarah. That was great. And we already have one question, so people are listening. So the question is, does the data regarding underground infrastructure need to be inputted into TownSuite software, or is there a way to find the 30-year-old lines buried under the ground?
Sarah Minnis, I think you're more qualified to answer that than I am.
Yeah, barely, but definitely Gerry, who's talking next, can speak more to how to find those 30-year-old lines buried under the ground. For the TownSuite software, though, it's my understanding that you do have to have the GPS locations of where that infrastructure is to input into the system. So, but definitely the process of finding, if you don't know or you don't have the maps of where those 30-year-old lines are buried under the ground, is a great process to go through as you are you're doing your asset management. So, in respect to that, is there any more questions in relation to Sarah's presentation? Okay, then we're gonna go on to Gerry, and Gerry is actually works for Municipal Affairs and Environment and can speak a lot more about the question that was just asked. Gerry graduated with a diploma in civil engineering technology in 1997 and completed his degree in applied science in 2014. He spent 4 years working with engineering services at the City of Vancouver before relocating back to Newfoundland in 2001. He has been working in rural Newfoundland and Labrador since that time in various capacities, with municipal assessment, municipal affairs, and began training operators in November 2002. He is the provincial certifier and sits on the Canadian Water and Wastewater Operator Certification Committee. In his spare time, he snowboards, plays ice hockey, is an amateur musician, and camps with his family. Gerry, take it away.
Hey, thank you very much. So my talk is it should dovetail nicely with Sarah's. We see a lot of the same things here. Obviously, Newfoundland is fairly rural. So if some of the material repeats, it was completely unintended. But like I said, a lot of the things that she encountered, you're going to see some of the steps that we've taken here to try and address some of the concerns that they found in their studies. So the outline, we're going to talk a little bit about the multi-barrier strategic action plan for drinking water that we're using here in Newfoundland. And we're going to talk about our current challenges and solutions and what we've chosen as the path forward. So a multi-barrier approach is an integrated system of procedures, processes, and tools that are going to collectively prevent or reduce the contamination of drinking water from the source to the tap in order to reduce the risks to the public. So we've got a little graphic here just breaking down what that multi-barrier strategic action plan is. So in level 1, it looks at source water protection, our treatment processes, and then our distribution systems. I won't go into great detail there because everything that Sarah said earlier echoes here as well. We have all the same things. We have very small towns, we have aging infrastructure, we have limited operator capacity, so there's no need to repeat all that. Level 2 of the multi-barrier strategic action plan will focus on monitoring, data management and reporting, inspection enforcement, operator education and certification, and some of our corrective measures. And that's kind of where we've been doing a lot of work in the last 15 years since I've been here. And the third level of that is going to be your legislative and policies, your guidelines, your acts and your legislation that you put in place to be able to protect and enforce rules around drinking water and infrastructure. So level 1, as mentioned, is source protection. We don't have many people with upstream interferences here. We have a lot of remote rural communities, so it's not like central Canada where when someone dumps into a river, wastewater into a river, it's going to hit another community's drinking water downstream. We're fortunate that way, but we do have some source protection. Drinking water treatment and drinking water distribution. So we have the Water Resources Act, Section 39 and 31 for both surface water and groundwater, legislate that. So the only thing I'm really going to discuss on this slide is the number of public water supply systems. Now, we don't have the numbers that Sarah mentioned in the Kootenays, but we have similar numbers. We've got 477 communities, public water supplies, servicing 500,000 people. As you can see here, of those surface water supply sources, there's 300 and 258 of those have been protected. We've got close to 200 groundwater sources, and we've only got about 60 of those protected. So we're still working towards protection of some of our sources. With regards to treatment, because we have so many small systems here in Newfoundland, the bulk of ours are using just basic chlorination. That's it. We take raw surface water with all its organics and all that stuff, and we're chlorinating it. We don't have much in the way of pre-filtration, sand filtration, anything like that in the bulk of our small communities. And as you can see from the slide here on the left, most of those are using a liquid chlorine, like a sodium hypochlorite, to disinfect their water. Down the bottom of the table, you can see we've got 443 chlorination systems. We've got some ultraviolet light for primary disinfection, mixed oxidants in a couple of cases, some ozone, and we do have one chloramine, which is being used by the city of St. John's. But the thing is, everybody is using chlorination for their secondary disinfectant here. So for drinking water treatment, there's a slide in the upper left there. That's the number of wastewater treatment plants per fiscal year that we have. The beige bar is conventional water treatment plants, and the dark brown bar is representing a small scale water treatment plant, which I'm going to talk about later in the presentation. The slide on the right, that represents a lot of the surface raw water quality color we have. A lot of places have tea color water, and then we're just chlorinating that. So our distribution systems, as Sarah mentioned earlier, we've got a lot of small ones. You can see in the top slide there, we've only got one system greater than 50,000 people. We've only got a half a dozen or five between 15 and 50,000. Most of them are less than 500. So it's a lot of very, very, very small water distribution systems with limited operator capacity, just like Sarah was mentioning earlier. So for level 2 of the multi-barrier strategic action plan, this is where I do the bulk of my work. So we have monitoring, we look at operator education, training, and certification. We do some data management and reporting, we do some inspection and enforcement, and then we look at what the corrective measures are. So this is where our efforts are focused going forward for addressing rural infrastructure issues. So when it comes to monitoring, we've got a unique system here in that the provincial government is responsible for a lot of the regular monitoring. So most of the bacteriological samples that are collected for testing here on water distribution systems are collected by the provincial government. So a branch called Service NL, they do the regular bacteriological for total coliforms and E. coli. The number of samples taken per month are based on the population. So a very small town might get a bacteriological sample taken every 2 to 3 weeks, whereas a larger center will be obviously probably submitting a sample every week or multiple samples every week. The chemical parameters, physical parameters, metals, and disinfection byproducts, that's all monitored by the provincial government as well. The onus is not on the communities to do it. We're doing that ourselves. And that's my particular group there. So we do quarterly sampling. So we have staff that goes out and collects those samples and gets all the data back and then communicates back to the communities what we found. We found that with a lot of small communities with volunteer operators, if we were putting the onus on them to do this sampling themselves, it just wouldn't get done. So we took it on ourselves. So for monitoring, there's a slide on top. So the number of chemical water quality samples that were taken by my department in 2016-17 was 2,700 approximately. So you can see we've got about 80 source samples. So what we do is we don't monitor every source, every sampling season. We've got a lot of data. So over time, we've got a pretty good catalog of what those sources are looking like. We do all the THM and HAA, all the disinfection byproduct data samples. And on the bottom, that's the number of bacteriological samples that are collected by Service NL throughout the year. So as I mentioned, our health officers are going around doing those. So we collect close to 20,000 samples in the year for the whole province. And that's for public drinking water systems, not private. Private ones are submitted by the owners themselves to Service NL. So for data management and reporting, obviously with all that sample stuff, all those samples, we have a large volume of data that requires QA/QC programs. So that's done by Water Resources. All the data is available on our Water Resources portal. So on our website, anybody from the public can go in any time of day and log in and get the chemical water parameters for a community. You can just go in with the drop-down box and search it. We've got years of data in there. So if anybody wants to know what's happening in any of the communities at any time, it's all available on the internet. And it gets updated as every sample season goes by. We go with 4 sampling seasons. So that's something we're doing a little unique. It's costly to the government, but unfortunately to get it done, we kind of had to take that on ourselves rather than just legislating that people need to do it. Again, so we also have mapping available as part of that data management. So kind of dovetailing what goes on with the town suite. Town suite is taken off in quite a few towns here. We do a lot of mapping. We have a mapping application ourselves. So we map sewer outfalls, we map where chlorination facilities are, we map protected watersheds and stuff like that. So anybody from the public can go into our mapping portal at any time and they can find out, as you can see on this graphic here, the area in green is actually protected watersheds. The blue dots are communities, and that stuff is updated and available all the time. One of the things we've done the last few years is we actually send out a water system survey and a wastewater system survey, and towns are replying back to us with a little bit more. Every year we ask for different parameters so we can get a little more information about their systems, just so that we have a catalog record of ourselves. So when it comes to reporting, we send out seasonal community drinking water quality email reports. We used to send out physical paper ones quarterly. Now we're just doing emails, and if people want to print them themselves, they can. any exceedance reports. So our people are looking at every bit of data. So if there's any type of lead exceedance or arsenic or anything that comes in those all those samples, we notify the towns as soon as we get the results back. We do an annual safety drinking water report, which is published every year and available to the public. And we've been getting into some web documents recently. Again, all of this stuff is available on our website. So level 2 is the operator education, training, and certification. This is a unique approach to training that we started probably back in 2002. So there's two things that we're doing, and this is the bit where the bulk of my work is. So what we do is we offer classroom-style seminars in multiple locations around the province. So Sarah mentioned about the cost and the location, having to send people away for training in small rural communities. We saw the same thing. So what we do in about 20 different locations throughout the province, every fall and spring, we offer different water distribution, wastewater collection, water treatment, wastewater treatment courses. They're offered in different locations every year so that communities can get access to them. It's free to attend. So they're generally about a 3-day course. We don't charge anybody to attend them. We usually keep them to about 20 seats per course. But as I said, we move them around all the time. And those courses are conducted by our own staff. We have someone that does water distribution, someone that does wastewater collection. I teach the wastewater treatment course myself. So that's going on every spring and fall. Our spring session schedule went out yesterday, and we're receiving calls about that already. So the other thing we do to complement that is we do hands-on on-site training with mobile training units. So what you can see on the right here is a picture of a cube van that we have outfitted with. You can probably see there's a fire hydrant in there. So we got a bunch of water system tools, leak detection equipment, we got pressure reducing valves, chemical feed pumps, gas chlorination equipment. So we go around to each individual community and we will do hands-on training in that community. So if a new operator gets hired in a small community, probably on our northern peninsula, they can contact one of our 3 operator trainers and we will schedule appointments to go meet them. So right now for on-site training curriculums, we have probably 8 to 10. So we do training in just how to do chlorine residuals using a colorimeter test kit. We do training in liquid chlorination systems where we'll teach them to strip down a chemical feed pump. We do gas chlorination. We do fire hydrant maintenance. So, and that is all free. So anytime anybody gets a new operator, all they have to do is get a hold of us, and then we will try to schedule our training to meet their needs. So whenever a new operator is hired, it generally means you're looking at a half a dozen visits for our operator trainers to go to try and get those people up to speed. Unfortunately, as Sarah mentioned, a lot of records aren't kept. One positive thing that's coming out of our training program, our 3 operator trainers have been around for a while, and we're becoming quite familiar with the infrastructure. So it's helpful to the new operators that are there. Without the records, we kind of get them going. We know where a lot of the infrastructure is, and we hopefully then they'll start recording stuff and monitoring stuff. And the third part is certification, as Sarah also mentioned. So everybody has different levels of mandatory certification. In Newfoundland right now, we're only looking at mandatory for populations above 1,000. We're trying to get there for everybody, but right now it's only mandatory for populations above 1,000. So these classroom sessions that we put off, they're all based on preparing for people to challenge the certification exam. So everyone has the exact same requirements for certification all over Canada. All our communities, our provinces work together to make sure everybody is requiring the same stuff, because the certificates do have reciprocity all over the country. So if you get water distribution 1 in Newfoundland and you move to BC, then you can move to BC and transfer it, or likewise you can come back. One thing we're starting to see now is we're starting to see people that lived abroad in Canada with, say, water treatment or wastewater treatment backgrounds are now moving back to Newfoundland and transferring their certifications back. So one of the things that has come out of this was a corrective measure we looked at years ago in implementing our training and certification program. So one of the things that has come out of it from this bar, you can see we've got a lot more certified operators. That is the purple bars there. The overall number of communities that have certified operators kind of peaked and just plateaued from 2005 up. So operator turnover is a lot of the number of new operators we get. And now our bigger municipalities are also getting involved in getting more staff. Years ago, they might have only had a handful of operators. Now they're getting all their staff certified. So we got a great high rate of improvement, especially the first couple of years. We got the low hanging fruit. we still have holdout communities that don't participate in the free training. Believe it or not, we take it to their door, and a lot of them don't want to. And the problem with that is we have a lot of volunteer committees. A lot of our really, really small places, it's people that aren't getting paid. They have day jobs that they can't really take time away. We do try to accommodate them as best we can. We'll try and do training in the evenings if possible, whatever works for them, just to get them that information to be able to run their systems. And obviously, with the baby boomers starting to retire, we're starting to see some of those people going by the wayside. So level 3 is just a legislative thing. So as you know, new parameters emerge and stuff like that. So we're trying to put acts and legislation in place that allows us to properly manage and enforce anything around our wastewater and water distribution systems. The recent changes to the federal guidelines for wastewater has really put a push on here in Newfoundland, as no one in our small systems was doing much in the way of wastewater monitoring. We're fortunate that most of our communities are on the ocean, and it's okay to have an outfall just going straight because they don't have that much volume, but we're starting up with changing our legislation. So we've got a Water Resources Act that takes care of water rights, protection of public water supplies, and anybody that's going to be doing construction on a water distribution system or wastewater treatment system. Municipal Affairs, they oversee the management and the money side of it. And the Municipalities Act grants powers to municipalities for construction and operation of infrastructure. We try to get involved in public awareness, and so we've added a web page. We're doing new outreach videos on the YouTube link that's here. We've got 3 videos that we put together last year. We're just completing 4 more outreach videos. These are simple, like how to take a chlorine residual, how to do a chemical water sample, how to take a bacteriological sample. So we're trying to do a little more outreach that way. And we've got brochures that we hand out. We use the Canadian Drinking Water Guidelines. Those are our water quality guidelines that we reference, and we stick to those. We don't have anything outside of that, really. And that's pretty well it for the multi-barrier strategic action plan. So some of our challenges are boil water advisories. We do have a great number of them for the small population. It's because we have so many small systems. We have people that are chlorinating and maintaining a residual, but because they're volunteer operators, they don't want the responsibility of coming off a boil water advisory on the chance something goes wrong. They might be maintaining the chlorination building every day, but on the chance they don't get there, they don't want that responsibility. And our disinfection byproducts are one of our challenges because, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of times we're just taking raw surface water with a lot of organic contact, and we're just chlorinating it, which is a recipe for some of our DPPs. So right now we've got about 200 boil water advisories. 146 of these communities are affected by them, and that affects about 35,000 of our population. So about 8% of our population is affected by those boil water advisories. And over 60% of them have been in effect for over 5 years. Every one of those is going to be a small rural community that's run by volunteers. So we're slowly getting to the municipalities. We're still got a lot of work to do in our volunteer groups. We're developing standard operating procedures for removing boil water advisories. So we've got pamphlets and tools set up to help communities get off these boil water advisories, whether it's informational handouts on how to maintain their system, how to regular inspections for their safe water storage tanks, or even the protocols for just this is how you get off a boil water advisory. So as I mentioned, our water treatment plants, one thing we've been doing recently is we do have a lot of very small towns that don't have the financial capacity to put in full-scale treatment for every bit of water they're using. So what we've done is we've put in a small, what we're calling potable water dispensing units, and it's just a small-scale water treatment plant. So it's gonna, we've got about 29 operating right now, and so it's just a small plant where people will come with their buckets and get their drinking water. So they'll just have regular chlorinated water at their homes and in their taps for use, but their drinking water and cooking water they can collect at a central area in town. They're intended to treat only a small portion of the drinking water, and they've become pretty successful in places where we had really, really highly colored water, and it was just too expensive to treat all of it. They're going to use all the same processes that regular plants use, multimedia filtration, activated carbon, reverse osmosis. Then we use ozone disinfection. So what's next? We're going to continue to explore ideas with our potable water dispensing units. We're trying to look at regionalizing more systems. We do have a couple of areas where they have a regional operator that's kind of taking care of 5 towns, 6 towns. We're trying to get more of that going because it seems like then the small towns can pool their resources together and pay one person full time, and it gets better quality of service. We're going to continue to do public engagement, social media stuff, and we're going to promote a risk-based management approach in our drinking water systems. All right, are there any questions?
All right, thank you, Gerry. That was great. So it looks like we have 3 questions from the same person. So I'll just read maybe the first 2 together, and then the last one is a little bit different. So we're wondering, what is the cost of the course, and do you provide training outside of the province? For example, for Manitoba.
We don't provide training outside the province right now. We have spoken at like workshops and conferences and stuff like that outside the province, but we don't go outside the province to provide training. The cost to the municipalities is only their operators' time in the daytime. So if we're scheduling something in their area and it's going to be a 3-day course, all they have to do is sign up. And the same thing with the hands-on training. All they have to do is call us, and we're taking on the brunt of that cost. We'll go and do all the training with them. Great.
And asset management, what are the parameters you will consider that will decide that a pipe needs replacement?
Well, hopefully you could get a history of leakage if you've got that. Sometimes you can dig down to see the quality of pipe. If it's an older infrastructure, chances are it'll get replaced. Generally here in Newfoundland, we've got pretty corrosive soils and acidic conditions. Low pH water, plus we're adding chlorine to it, so the infrastructure isn't lasting as long as it would in other places. When I moved back to Newfoundland, systems were considered old at 40 years old. When I was with the city of Vancouver in the 90s, we were replacing water mains then in the 90s that were only installed in the 1700s or 1917, 1920. So infrastructure was lasting a lot longer there compared to when I came back and saw the infrastructure here. So I kind of danced around that because there's no set answer. Generally, a history of breaks is it. It's a history of trouble. And when you're doing your leak repairs, you can get an actual visual of the condition of the pipe.
Great. And we have a question from Barbara Barter. Hi, Barbara. Good to have you on. Could you elaborate on the risk-based management?
I cannot, because that is done by our manager. So she wanted me to put that in the slide, but Paula handles that. So I can get back if someone wants to give me an email address, or you want to give you an email address, I can get some detail back for you for that.
Okay, great. Thanks.
And to get back to what Sarah Breen mentioned, generally with the town suite and stuff like that, in a lot of these small places where there's no record, you have to go out and physically find it first, and then you'll have to come up with a GPS coordinate. And that could be as simple as going out with 2 coat hangers and finding where the water lines are, using a bit of witchcraft to guess where the water lines are.
But they need those coordinates to plug into the system.
They do, yeah.
Great. Yeah. All right, great. We have Barbara's email address, so we're good in that that department. All right. Does anybody have any more questions for Gerry specifically? And we will have time at the end for all of our panelists as well, if anybody thinks of anything else. So in the interest of time, we'll move on to Paul. Paul's going to switch the focus from built infrastructure, which we've been talking about, to some discussion on green infrastructure. Paul Kraehling is a PhD Rural Studies candidate at the School of Environmental Design and Rural Development at the University of Guelph. He is currently studying the use of nature as a green infrastructure planning tool to build resilient rural communities. He also teaches and works on various research projects at the university. Paul is a member of the Ontario Professional Planners Institute and is a registered professional planner. He has worked in the municipal planning field for over 35 years, and we're very happy to have him. Take it away, Paul.
Hello, everybody there, and happy World Water Day. So I'm going to be looking at the water issue, I guess, from a 30,000 foot level here. So I hope it all fits in together at the end. But what I'm looking at here is applying natural systems as a green infrastructure mechanism to plan resilient rural communities. And today, with today's focus on water, I'm going to be looking at that. So in terms of the outline, I'm going to be defining green infrastructure, how I'm applying that in my research. I'm going to be looking, again, some of the rural area general issues, resiliency challenges that communities have. I'm going to then go into some research that we did with the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, so MAFRA. And then I'm going to follow up that with some of my detailed PhD workings around land use planning is what this focus is going to be about. So in terms of the definition, natural elements, real and artificial, that provide multifunctional benefits to both human and natural communities. In Ontario, we have the provincial policy statement, which is something that the provincial government puts out and basically requires agencies and municipalities to consider these matters or to implement these matters dealing with land use. The definition for green infrastructure is around hydrological functions and processes, plus a bunch of other things that I'm going to be highlighting. But it's all associated with quality and quantity controls associated with water. So what are some example elements contained within a green infrastructure? And I'm looking at this from a planning framework, again, from a land use planning background. So that's my frame. So at the local level, we have individual private gardens, we have cemeteries, churchyards, institutional open spaces, parks, areas, school grounds, and then we have other vacant lands in there. And then moving up into a larger scale area, we have community parks, country parks, brownfield lands, rivers and floodplains, landfills possibly, for remediation in agricultural areas. And then at the regional level, provincial and national scales, and in the European context, even at the international level, there's matters dealing with regional parks, agricultural lands, reservoirs, rivers, trail systems, all those kind of things that are all available at that scale. And all these can fit together within your green infrastructure planning system. So take all those words and put it into a nice graphic. This is a local neighboring municipality, Rockwood, Ontario, which is richly endowed with a lot of green infrastructural features. And so again, tying it back to water, stormwater management, water, private yards where it's trees primarily, or lawns, street trees. Your business district areas are enhanced through street tree placements. Parks, again, at different scales. That's a neighborhood park there. Connecting paths that connect these features together to conservation areas if there's parks or conservation lands nearby. Forests, community gateways. In a lot of instances, these green infrastructural elements are important natural defining elements to a community's image. And so again, that's part of the importance. Brownfield cleanup lands, former industrial uses that may be contaminating the groundwater. Riparian buffers, your vegetated areas adjacent to your rivers are important elements. Windbreaks, living snow fences, your wetland areas, again, serving as filters for the runoff from lands, from farmlands possibly, going into your river systems. So all those are elements for green infrastructure. In looking at the challenges to rural community resilience, there's good background information from the Canadian Rural Revitalization Foundation State of Rural Canada reports. And also in Ontario, there's the Ontario Rural Institute that puts out focus on rural census fact sheets. And again, the summary notes here are just kind of a very high level overview of what that's all about. So socioeconomic issues that we're aware of in rural areas, creating employment opportunities, retaining population, and then schisms in the age of the population, either having a lot of elderly people and younger folks cause challenges. We heard already about the hard infrastructure upkeep. So the gray infrastructure that is on the landscape, in a lot of instances, there's a lot of work or money that's needed to pay for that. Retaining local municipal services is a challenge in many areas, and reduced municipal capacity, just the number of employees and capacity in a rural area to be able to deliver services are all challenges. In addition to those localized issues, these are bigger societal issues. So again, climate change, adaptation, mitigation. This is these illustrations here are from Ontario in looking at the climate change impacts. Great Lakes cleanup issues. So again, environmental stewardship matters and biodiversity protection are all components of that. Recently, the Ontario government has been looking at agricultural soil health and conservation, as well as pollinator health. So again, there's a number of strategic initiatives that can all tie back to green infrastructure and in water in particular. So the busy slide here, you're probably going to have a greater length of time to look at it, but basically it's from the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, and it defines that the goods and services of nature, which are illustrated on the left-hand side there, support, provide, regulate, and give us cultural attributes to our community's health and well-being, which are illustrated on the right-hand side: security, employment opportunities, health, social relations, and those are all provided with different linkages, some stronger, some weaker. But again, all these elements that are often not recognized all support our livelihoods and life. Going on to the specific elements with the our research. So this was the OMAFRA U of G partnership, where we were looking at green infrastructure for Ontario's rural communities, using nature for economic development and community resilience. This was under Dr. Wayne Caldwell and a group of research grad students, including myself. So we conducted a literature review here in a way. We conducted a survey. This was an online survey to community leaders, municipalities, public health units, conservation authorities, community future groups, and First Nation communities in Ontario. And 700 surveys were distributed, and we received 110 surveys back. And from that, we also discerned innovative practices, policies, and plans that these different leaders had used in their specific areas that they wanted to share with others in rural Ontario. And that the word cloud on the right-hand side basically illustrates the main issues that people were identifying, or the main programs and plans that they had in place. And again, you can see water, stormwater, planning, some of the important issues that are being looked at that. So from our surveys, then we did key informant interviews. Out of the 60, there were 20 key informant interviews. And from that, we did a case study write-up for 13 of them that are available in our final report. And I'll give a link at the end of my presentation here where you can find that information. So in terms of the literature review, the greatest numbers of plans and things are from the European Union, which has been doing this for several decades now. So they have a strong interest in addressing climate change impacts and protection of biodiversity. So there's a number of strategic initiatives by the European Union that is administered at the national level and then down to the municipal level. So there's a wealth of information there. In terms of closer to where we are in the US, there's some interesting examples of green infrastructure. This one on the left-hand side from Lancaster County is an interesting regional plan that in an intensive agricultural area that is managed by Mennonites and Amish, and concerns about surface water runoff from the agricultural lands, and also combined sewer outflows that occur in the city of Lancaster were the impetus behind their green infrastructure plan. The plan on the right is from the Saratoga County, New York. Again, they looked at things a little bit differently. In that instance, they're looking at tourism aspects of an equine trail system, which is quite prevalent in that area, and they wanted to increase it. And again, waterway areas are important trail locations for that aspect of planning. Looking at our survey, there were many different innovative ideas. These are listed here. I don't have time again to go through all that, but suffice to say that there is a variety of approaches that municipalities are using to look at green infrastructure, use it in their local contexts. Again, in terms of economic benefits, which the Ontario Ministry of Ag, Food and Rural Affairs was looking at, these again, there was a multitude of different matters that were considered to create jobs and economic benefit, and again, and offer also cost benefits to rural municipalities. So our full report goes into more detail on that. In writing up our document, we categorized those elements into these 8 different categories. So again, stormwater management is one of those elements, but it has interrelationships to all those other things from the ecosystem services perspective. This slide shows the 8 theme areas across the top of the page, what we were looking at, and then our 13 case studies down the side. And when you look at this, it's interesting to look at water is featured in most of our case studies. So again, water and stormwater management issues, and also community livability. So that's very sensible, where we're all dependent upon quality water for our communities, as well as to support the ecosystems within them. So today I'm going to just highlight 2 areas: Essex region down near Detroit, Windsor area. They have a Clean Water Green Spaces program. So it's an incentive program for landowners to improve regional water quality and also increase natural areas and biodiversity. The funding is provided for natural area restoration, buffer strips, windbreaks, tree planting, soil erosion mechanisms, and then also artificial wetlands, pollinator plantings, all with the notion of helping with the Great Lakes cleanup. The next one, a little bit further to the north, along the eastern shores of Lake Huron in the county of Huron, is the Garvey Creek Glen Drain Subwatershed Plan. And this is one of 5 project watershed areas along the Lake Huron shoreline, looking at mechanisms to improve water quality and reduce soil erosion. So it's quite an elaborate system in place with pre and post monitoring rural stormwater runoff and stewardship efforts. This slide illustrates some of the mechanisms that have been put in place: natural channels, constructed wetlands, erosion control berms and controlled outlets, and grass swales, all with the intent of enhancing stormwater runoff from agricultural areas, the quality of that runoff, and also looking at quantity potential of storing it on the land as we have increased droughts and increased climate change impacts. In looking at the other work that I discovered through my PhD work. So this is a rural sewage lagoon. So there's many across Ontario. And when, again, you look at the economic benefit potential of this, you can see from Ontario Nature that these sewage lagoons are a great place for bird watching. So tying your necessary infrastructure, the artificial wetlands that help your clean up rural sewage runoff or from your communities can also be great bird watching areas, which are highlighted for the tourists. In terms of water retention and with water quality, there's again strategic tree placement for living snow fences, windbreaks, shading. The Green Legacy Program is the largest municipal tree planting program in North America, coming from Wellington County. So I'd encourage you to look at that of what the good folks in Wellington County, which is nearby here in Guelph, to look at. The conservation authorities, Maitland Valley and the Grand River, are put a lot of energy into, again, to rural water cleanup, so floodplain riparian buffers, marginal farmland retirement are all examples there. Water and the recreational attributes are quite well known in rural parts and cater to urbanites as well. And it can also be used the temporary stormwater storage. So this is a recent picture on the right-hand side of a neighborhood park here in Guelph that can be used in the spring melt season, and in the rest of the year, it's a soccer field. So again, the multifunctional benefits of these open space areas can serve a number of functions. It's important to consider leveraging your NGO funding. These are some examples here. The ALICE program has now gone across Canada, Alternative Land Use Services. Trout Unlimited, Ducks Unlimited, Carolinian Canada is on the north shore of Lake Erie. So that's a specific geography. They all have funding to assist in creating green infrastructure. And the document at the bottom right-hand corner there is the Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada Growing Forward 2 program for environmental farm plans. So again, to assist private landowners in being good environmental stewards to clean up the land. Overall, the federal government has also put in place quite an ambitious plan to look at green infrastructure across Canada. This was in part of the 2017 budget and part of the Pan-Canadian Framework on Clean Growth and Climate Change. And $22 billion has been earmarked for green infrastructure implementation across the country. So again, if interested parties here want to look at that, what's available, the federal government's website on that can illustrate more to that particular aspect. In terms of web information on green infrastructure over the past several years, documents, the Ontario Green Infrastructure Coalition has been quite active. It's agencies primarily with an urban focus in the Toronto region, but they have a wealth of information on water and stormwater management systems. The document on the right has just been released by the Greenbelt Foundation around the city of Toronto. So in a green infrastructural guide for small towns and communities dealing with new development activity with basically low impact development mechanisms that can be applied to that. Any good academic has to put a really complex conceptual planning framework up, and so this is my PhD grand finale, basically partnering your green infrastructure elements with your gray infrastructure elements, all those working together to serve as the basis in your land use system to serve as sustainable systems and your triple bottom line directed at your economy, your community, your environment. And with all that, you're going to derive community resilience is what my premises in that. So in conclusion, green infrastructure elements can be effective in addressing many challenges found in rural places. Water as well as other green initiatives. Natural elements are very cost effective and adaptable to many settings. It's the understanding of their functionality and their usefulness, and applying it to challenges that are applicable in a particular area. There's many different examples of how that can occur. Land use planning using green infrastructure elements can be leveraged for community resiliency. So with that, I thank you for your attention, and if there's any questions, there's the link to the report for anybody that's interested in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. That was great. You have a question here that I don't know, maybe if you'll be able to answer, maybe Gerry can jump in here too. Can we apply methods from manufactured wetlands for treating wastewater to improving our surface water sources in Newfoundland?
Okay, I'm going to have to, because of the Newfoundland reference, I'm going to have to turn that over to Gerry. In the Ontario context, there is the land base to allow that to occur. The artificial wetlands have been demonstrated to be very useful to extract the harmful out of the effluent, yeah, but I'll leave it to Gerry to talk about the Newfoundland situation there.
Yes, no, I agree with you 100%. We're fortunate as well in the footprint isn't an issue for us. Generally, we've got enough space where we can put them in, and they are popping up everywhere. We are starting to see a lot more of these constructed wetlands as wastewater treatment solutions. As I mentioned, most of our places are going to the ocean, but we are getting a lot more treatment coming online in those rural towns that are on the coast. So even if they're deposited into the ocean, we are getting more treatment. But right now in central Newfoundland, where the bulk of our inland-based communities are, most of those towns do have wastewater treatment, and a few of them do have wetlands. And also the other most common one is a rural lagoon, like you mentioned, an actual aerated sewage lagoon. Again, footprint is not an issue here most of the time, so we can put those in, and there's not much capital costs in running them. They're easy to maintain. So yes, the answer is yes. My question back to that particular person would be, generally a lot of our surface water supplies here aren't really that polluted. We don't have that much impact by human waste here. There might be a little bit, but not a whole lot in our inland freshwater sources. So a lot of what we're finding in our surface water supplies is just natural organic material. Is that sufficient?
Yeah, that's great. Shelley, do you have any follow-up to that? Any follow-up questions? Okay, well, we'll move on. We do have a question for everyone. So if no one has any more specific questions for Paul, we'll move on to our panel discussion. Roddy Bolivar, sorry if I say your name wrong, today says today's challenges may be able to benefit from new practices and new technologies, but the water/wastewater industry is historically conservative. Paul talked about green infrastructure, relatively new. What are the main roadblocks to adopting new practices or new technologies? Maybe we'll start with Sarah, and then Gerry, and then Paul.
So I responded via, like, in the text box, so I won't take up Paul and Gerry's time. I'm actually very interested to hear Paul's response to this, but I think there's a lot of potential barriers or a lack of incentives around policy, for example, and I would just point to that example of the third-party pressure from the peer-to-peer example. And not that there's somebody standing over you telling you that you must do something, but having the accountability, you know, and as somebody who works from a home office, that accountability to whoever my supervisor is huge, because it pushes you to do something. Without that kind of accountability piece or that pressure, I just typically observe people defaulting to what they do have pressure for, so whatever fire is burning on their desk.
Gerry?
With regards to specific technologies, I would think the biggest thing we find here is just financial capacity. We've got a lot of small towns with a very, very older demographic. There's a lot of out-migration in most of our communities, so we're generally looking at, we've got communities where 80% of the population are pensioners. So just financial capacity is the biggest roadblock I see for that in our communities.
Paul?
So in terms of the capacity, it's again from the research that we did, it was something either an external activity or something that a drought, a flood, something that spurred action at a local area to deal with a particular matter was what was the stimulus for a lot of the projects that came underway. With the federal government putting funding available and the NGOs that have funding, if you can create a plan or some kind of a localized strategic initiative that can demonstrate to others, either with government, senior levels of government, or to NGOs that may have funding availability, then you can get away from the local tax base and putting additional pressures on the local tax base by bringing external monies into a local area. So I think it's exciting in terms of the green infrastructure rate at the moment, as I've conducted my research over many of the last few years, how I kind of watch the press and the political interest in again, climate change is the main one. That's what's occurring in Ontario, climate change impacts and how to address those. And again, the impacts or the possibilities that green infrastructure can assist with that respect, as well as how it ties back into water then.
Great, thanks. Okay, we have a question. I think this is more for Paul, but perhaps Gerry can also answer. Wetlands will be suitable for what size of population?
My big proponent is as green infrastructure. We have, again, different size municipalities. Or even land areas like looking at some of the agricultural or the ALICE, the Ducks Unlimited, they all have different parameters that they're looking at. And so again, these artificial wetlands that are created, there has to be a fit with what other agencies or that are interested in. So it varies. I'm going to give a very loose-fitting answer that it just can vary quite a bit about your available land area, the interests that are coming from possibly the NGOs or from the senior levels of government, or what you need, even what you need in order to be able to treat the effluent, your sewage pond. But that's all by some formulas, and that will all dictate again how much land area need to be set aside for that.
Could you repeat the question again?
Yep.
It was based on size, was it not?
Yeah, so wetlands would be suitable for what size of population? So I guess
okay, all right.
More about land base, and is there a minimum maybe that he's asking?
No, there is no minimum. I was looking at a wetland-based private disposal system for a single residence last year. I design waste treatment stuff outside of my day job, and I was looking for a single building. They were looking at putting in a little wetland, and we've got them here in Newfoundland on the west coast, and we've got other ones on the east coast as well. But yeah, a single home can have a little wetland. So you're only looking at an actual pond of reed beds, maybe 10 by 10 feet. So you've got your septic tank taking your primaries and your floatables and stuff out of it. So really you can go as small as you want. The thing is, when you're getting that small, it's going to be more costly. Obviously, with the more people you're drawn from, or the more services you're drawn from, the greater volume of water, the less expensive it will be to put in. Like for this single residence, it was $25,000 to put in a single disposal system. Right? Wow. So other people would opt to go with, say, a septic system for $10,000 for, like, say, a single residence. So as Paul mentioned, there's really no limit based on if you've got the footprint. If you've got the square area footage where you can actually put the reed beds and everything you need in there, you can make them as big as you want, but you can also make them as small as you want. Does that answer it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I just wanted to just feed on that as well. So Gerry, yeah, that $25,000 cost, and that would be other co-benefits, what that homeowner is looking at doing, environmental stewardship initiatives or other things that possibly would tie into that. So, because I think that's quite expensive for one residence.
Everything's expensive in Newfoundland. We're an island off the coast, so nothing's getting cheap.
What was the impetus from that landowner, Gerry, of wanting to do that, the wetland?
The soil wasn't suitable for a standard percolation-based septic system.
Ah, okay.
It was all peat, and not peat. It was all what we refer to locally as pug, heavily clay and silty material.
Okay.
And so the ground just won't percolate there. So if you put in a regular septic system, the water would pond on the top and it wouldn't filtrate down, and the biomat wouldn't form around the pipe, so it wouldn't get treated. So you'd have sewer coming to the surface. So that's what forced that there.
Interesting. Do we have any other questions for our panelists? I know I have a few questions. If no one else does, I'll shamelessly take this opportunity. So we are the Rural Policy Learning Commons, and we're kind of policy nerds. I have a question for each of you to answer. If you could change one thing in relation to rural water infrastructure policy, whether it be on a national scale or within your own province or even your own jurisdiction, what would you change? Maybe we'll start with Paul this time, and then Gerry, and then Sarah.
Okay, well, I guess on that, in Ontario's context, there's a lot of policy in rural Ontario, possibly going into the regulatory framework as well. So I think there's a lot of policy. My final conclusions on my research, it has to really vary by different areas. You have to have the local stakeholders in agreement with what you're proposing to do, whether it's directed at your drinking water supplies. If that's a challenge, then you should be looking at implementing measures on green infrastructure that can improve your drinking water capability. If you have droughts or other things that are impacting the economic base for your community, then you should be looking at other aspects that can improve the environment. So it really varies. Conservation authorities are quite prevalent in Southern Ontario, and the policy framework through the provincial policy statement is basically encouraging or mandating, depending where you are, to work with the conservation authorities to create strategic integrated watershed plans. So there's lots of policy in place. It's I think the challenges is knowing which one to use and leaving that up to local residents and local stakeholders in dealing with the issues that they have available.
Thanks, Paul. That's great. Gerry?
So I guess my response would be based on what I see on a day-to-day basis. And not that I want to tax everybody, but the financial capacity is the biggest thing I see with our rural communities, and there is no financial capacity there to operate and maintain their systems, let alone to improve them. And that's because, I've got communities, populations of 100 people or 500 where they pay $84 a year for their water. That's just not enough money coming in to maintain a water system, with 6-inch water mains and, chemical feed pumps and bag meters and stuff like, basic stuff like that. So that's my thing. That's the biggest roadblock we have here, is the very, very small places. And like I said, but there's going to be limited financial capacity there because you've got so many pensioners in place. So that's the biggest hurdle we face daily. It's just there's no money to operate and maintain the systems. We can give them all the guidance and help they want. I can go out and show them. You know, I can show them how to dig a pipe up out of the ground and do a repair on it, but if they don't have staff or money to do it, then they're handcuffed.
Yeah, for sure. Sarah?
I would definitely echo what Gerry said for the funding and financial mechanisms in two ways. One, municipalities are hobbled by really antiquated financial mechanisms where property tax is one of their number one ways to collect any sort of money. They get basically nothing when it comes to provincial taxes or federal taxes or like other than the distribution of the gas fund. So having a more appropriate funding mechanism for all the services, not just water, but other services that they have to provide, and then pairing that with a better understanding from the general public as to what things cost. I mean, I can't be willing to spend $100 a month on my cell phone, but not on drinking water. Like that does not make any sense. And then from a bigger wish perspective, I would like to see policies that are more supportive of not even just policies, but institutional structure that deals with issues around integration. Like we're talking about, you know, say drinking water and or even wastewater and drinking water, and you've got this kind of box that everything is sitting in. But the example that I like to give is, you know, boil water advisories do not attract tourists, and all of a sudden you've got this line between your water system and the bodies that regulate it and the people who manage it, and an economic component of your town's economy and well-being. But those plans and policies and regulations and bodies that manage those two things do not talk to each other, or at least very rarely do they talk to each other, at least in my experience. And that goes across the board for environmental issues, economic, and so on and so forth. I think we have hived off our water systems away from the rest of our communities in some cases is a mistake, and we need institutional structures and policies that can work to change that.
Can I just jump in again I agree with Sarah Breen completely. So I'm in reflection of one of my key informants that said the environment is the economy and the economy is the environment. So if you can do anything that brings those together and thinks outside of the box and breaking down the silos, then you have a greater opportunity to moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Definitely complicated issues on this front. We have a couple more minutes if anybody has some extra questions. Shelley, in answer to your question, we will have copies of the presentation online at RPLC-CAPR.ca, and you should get an email out as well when things are posted, as well as a survey. Do we have any more questions? Well, I want to leave on a positive note. Does all of our panelists, do they have something exciting or opportunities they want to share about exciting water-related things happening in their jurisdictions? Maybe just one happy story before we go.
I think there's a huge amount of happy stories. There's always things going on. Being a bit of a pragmatist, I like to recognize those things in context of, you know, the world, that there are challenges, they're there, but that's not necessarily a reason to get super down about it. There's really amazing things happening all the time. You know, and whether that's with drinking water, or, you know, I'm working on projects around agricultural drainage and wetland management now, and there's people. I think my positive takeaway would be that there's always people willing to do something creative and to make things better. And I think it's, you know, you just got to find those people and work with them.
Awesome. Gerry?
For anybody that's going to be in Gander, Newfoundland next week, we've got the Clean and Safe Drinking Water Workshop that's going ahead starting Tuesday morning. We've got 315 people registered right now, but there's always room for more if you want to come visit us.
Excellent. I've been to that one. It's always a good one. Sometimes standing room only. It's so popular. So
it will be standing room only again next week. I think the room has capacity for 300. So like I said, we've got 315 registered.
So that's a lot of people caring about their rural communities.
And in the instance around Guelph here, I'm going to just in local, so the transition town, there's a number of different initiatives around going on in Guelph and in surrounding municipalities. So again, just ways of being more resilient and a local base. And again, Sarah Breen, there's a lot of amazing things that people take the energy, the positive energy that stakeholders or individuals want to do on particular projects, whatever those are, and go with it. And you can make great changes cumulatively in small changes.
Excellent. That's great. The power of people. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sarah and Gerry and Paul, for sharing your expertise today. We had a great time. I think Michael's going to give a little outro and remind us of a few things, and take it away.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks to our host, of course, Sarah Minnis, and our presenters, Sarah Breen, Paul Kraehling, and Gerry Lahey, and also to Megan Rathall, who works out of the RPLC Central Office at Brandon University, for helping put this together. So thanks again to all our participants. A great webinar, and look forward to seeing you all online or in person in the future.